All right. Hi, everybody. And I hope I'll leave the introductions slide up as we're going in case anybody joins at the last second. But my name is Jenny Hirsch. I'm with Connecticut Food Share, and I'm also a member of the CFSA Steering Committee and the Food Action Plans Working Group. I'm really excited to be facilitating this with Sarah Huang from Grassroots Fund. And we're looking forward tonight to getting some feedback on the previous 3 sessions, giving you all a quick digest of what those 3 sessions were in case you missed some, a little refresher for everyone if they were there. And at the end, we're going to try to have a nice, robust discussion. I think it's 6:05. We'll see if some more people come, but for now, I think what we're going to do is have a larger group discussion with everyone together, so we can really get a good conversation going about what people learned, what they would want to see going forward, and some thoughts on what should be kind of informing our food action plan that we're working on. So with that, I think we'll kick this off, and I'm going to actually introduce Serena from Department of Ag, who is also a steering committee member, and she's going to Martha is going to give an overview on the environment slide from our first session.
I'm going to turn my camera on for a sec.
All right, so maybe can we go back and just kind of just very quickly go over these just to make sure that, and then if you were at any of the prior sessions, you kind of these slides will look familiar, but I do think that some of this stuff bears repeating, just making sure that you remember that the this summit was brought to you by the Connecticut Food System Alliance, and that what we are is we're a grassroots alliance statewide, and organizations, people, interested parties, funders, and that are all interested in creating broad system change and advancing a just, equitable, sustainable food system in Connecticut, with an underpinning of food justice as a core principle.
And for anyone who is unfamiliar with the concept of food justice, though I'm sure if you've been at our other sessions, you've seen a lot of this, food justice seeks to ensure that the benefits and risks of where, what, and how food is grown, produced, transported, distributed, accessed, and eaten are shared fairly. And we've really tried to center that at the core of our work, particularly with the food action plan that we've been working on. Our second session was about the food action plan. It's something you're going to hear us talking about a lot, but a lot of what we're hoping to get out of this session is your input on what's going to inform the food action plan and some key ideas we can take away from that. So if you're unfamiliar with a food action plan, it's a vision for what food and farms should look like for a city, county, or state. And ours will consist of current data. So what do we have now? And a vision for what we'd like to see in the future. And what we need from you is some recommendations for how we're going to get there. And that is going to really be what we're hoping to get out of this session tonight. And right now, Connecticut's the only state in New England without a food plan, but I promise you we are working hard on that. And with that, I will pass it over to Serena, who's going to talk about the food action plan.
Sure, thanks. So first off, kind of as Jenny was saying, that Connecticut doesn't have a food action plan currently. So CFSA is taking the lead on developing one for the state. And for this second session, we were fortunate to hear from Winton Pitkoff at the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative, and then Tanya Swain from the Maine Food Strategy. And so those are the 2 very similarly structured groups to CFSA in Massachusetts and Maine. So the main concept of them is kind of they're a network group and just kind of a clearinghouse, if you will, or for different kind of stakeholders throughout the food system. And I don't know, it was an interesting perspective. So both of them have had food action plans that they talked about. And they both kind of been in implementation phases for varying degrees of time. But one interesting perspective that Winton had shared was he's like, oh, Connecticut's actually lucky that you all don't have a food plan yet because you get to learn from everyone else. And it is true, it's nice to kind of be able to look at what Massachusetts and Maine, we heard from them, but also what other states throughout New England have kind of done, and both in their process, but then in how they're laying out their report and the contents. And so before I kind of touch on the timeline and everything, I'll just go into, so after we heard from both Tanya and Winton, and I'm not going to kind of go into detail on what they talked about, but there is a really great recording that's put up on Jamboard on YouTube that kind of is, they just, I think both gave about like a 10-15 minute presentation on their state's plan. And then we were able to break out into groups and kind of had a set of questions that everyone went through and tried to answer. And so kind of one of the big talking points was like, what can we just take away from the presentations that we just heard from Massachusetts and Maine? What do people like and would want to see replicated in Connecticut, and what do you think, or what do people think they would want changed or done differently? And a lot of the discussion centered around kind of the best ways to gather input and how to ensure inclusivity in creating the recommendations in the report, but also kind of not just the recommendations, but what are the like topic areas or the focuses of the report itself. And then also a lot of discussion went into the need for buy-in from kind of stakeholders across different levels throughout the state, and strong accountability in the plan so that it didn't just become a report sitting on the shelf. And then back to the discussion point also that people were talking about, kind of the desire to not just know about other New England state food plans, but people also wanted to go even bigger and look at what other states throughout the country had done around not just necessarily food plans, but food policy that states had, and then also internationally. So kind of a big question that we would love to be asking you all today is kind of, where do we start? Because obviously we could just kind of like go down rabbit holes of infinite research and, spend years gathering input. But would love to hear from you all when we get to the discussion later on kind of what you think the next step for the food plan would be. And I'm in the group with Jenny and Martha and a few other folks, and it's in the very nascent stages. So perfect time for more input. And I just dropped into the time frame that we're kind of looking at for the plan. But yeah, so hopefully 2024 has a completion date, but it's probably a little bit flexible, Martha. I don't know.
I think so.
We're going to give ourselves a little flexibility.
Well, the other thing too, just and this came up during the conversation, one of the reasons that it was possible to get Winton and Tanya to very willingly talk about their state food plans is that Connecticut Food System Alliance is a very active participant in a regional group with the other New England states on regional food system planning. And so we have like a continuous learning opportunity from other states in the region to help make our plan more robust from the get-go. And one of the benefits of that is that when another state is collecting data that relates to the food system, there is a bias now toward thinking beyond state lines. So that when Vermont is gathering data on what food is produced in New England and what food is consumed in New England. They are not just doing Vermont. They are, they're doing Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts as well. So it really is, it's a great time to be doing this. And so I think that the actual timeline is maybe not as critical as the process of doing it, because the more and more people we bring to the table, the more and more people who are thinking about this, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Serena. So we're going to have a much larger discussion later on once we get through all the session digest. But before we move on, I just do want to give, if there's anyone who has like a burning question that they don't want to forget, or that they feel like they need to sort of get out right now, I'll give anybody the opportunity for that before we move on. Okay, awesome. So next, Martha's going to present quickly on our environment session that we did our climate session. And I'll let Martha get going.
So I just thought that this was such an amazing session. I mean, we had two incredible presenters. One coming at the perspective of a soil scientist, Kip Kolosinskis, and he was, and his presentation, there are whole things in his presentation that can be just simply lifted into the plan, I believe. I mean, he was very, very comprehensive in it. And we also had Aziz Dekan, who came at this from everybody better get angry and they better get busy. And it's all hands on deck. This is not kind of like, this is not going to go away. It's not going to go away by thinking about it and all of that sort of stuff. So he didn't have any slides at all. But he was talking about how it is absolutely essential that we get motivated to do this. We are out of time. But specific to the food system, and one of the things that I think is very exciting about this is that, both in Connecticut and all across the region, and I think increasingly across the country, there was a time period not that long ago when people who were talking about food stuff would be in a column over here, and people who were talking about climate would be in a column over here, and they weren't necessarily talking to each other. And I think that over the last couple of years, especially, that there is clear recognition that these are not two conversations, they are the same conversation. And so part of what Kip presented to the group was like a very detailed perspective on what it is that we can expect. And it's not all bad news that, there is, climate change can also offer some opportunity for growers. But what it doesn't, we hear a lot about the downside, but we need to take a little bit of a balanced view. That's not to say that the overall news is not bad, but it is kind of like, but it is not 100% bad. So, I'm going to make some of the points that he made were that, adaptation to climate change is not a tomorrow thing. It is not a 2030 thing. It is not a 2040 thing. It is actually a now thing. And it is actually past time thing, that this adaptation needs to happen now. And there's a lot of strategies that can be put into play and need to be put into a play, including a clear understanding of the risk that's involved in this, how you deal with some of this through diversification, how we are being attentive to soil health, what does regenerative ag have for us in kind of like in the environment we find ourselves in, and what kind of like, what role does technology play? How this is going to look in Connecticut are some of the things that we have been seeing already. More 90-degree days, periods of drought, longer growing seasons. But when precipitation comes, it can come extraordinarily heavily and kind of like be very damaging. Winters will be warmer and kind of like, and that has huge implications for pests. What was in a hike the other day and picked a tick off. And that's not that, it didn't used to be that in November you would be finding ticks. but as I mentioned before, that there are opportunities in this, including the potential to expand and diversify agriculture, job creation in different ways, and economic growth in ways that we had not counted on before. Wanted to pay, special kind of like notice to a very amazing report called Farms Under Threat, which if you haven't looked at it, you should. And just as a reminder that one of the things that you will see in that report is that Connecticut is in the top 12 of most threatened states, along with Massachusetts and Rhode Island here in New England. And specific to Connecticut, less so for the, this is all a region-wide view, but Connecticut specifically needs to continue to pay attention to land access and protecting natural resources. We need to have a resilience mindset. Like, how do we make this food system survive and thrive through like a period of intense climate change? And there, there's lots of different ways we can do that: education, research, making sure there's adequate labor, making sure that our policy environment works for us, and that also making sure that we stay connected to efforts like the Governor's Council on Climate Change and other groups like that. I mentioned at the beginning, needing deep engagement with all hands on deck, and ensuring that when we are doing this, much like we are trying to be very attentive in the food plan, is that you make sure that voices who are typically underrepresented and often marginalized are at the table. And it's amazing how often we talk about agriculture without farmers at the table. It is amazing how often we talk about consumers without consumers at the table, particularly BIPOC consumers and low-income consumers. So it was a great session, and I think I will stop there. Any questions about that?
I just want to say that I'm sharing a bunch of resources in the chat right now, and the chat, including all these links and resources, will be available after the session along with this recording.
Thank you, Marcella, and thank you, Martha. The climate session I felt was such a key piece of this overall conversation that we're trying to have, because it really ties a lot of it acts really as a bridge between what we're trying to do. And I think it was just such an interesting session. I had a chance to watch after the fact, so I'm really glad that we did that this year. And I hope we'll have a little more discussion as we get later in the session tonight. Right now, I'm just gonna pass it over to Sarah Huang, and I have to shout out Sarah especially because she and I work together on planning tonight's session. So she has the extra task of presenting on the network session as well, and we thank her very much for that. So Sarah, whenever you want to kick it off with your...
Yeah, it actually looks like there's 2 questions. Oh, sorry, Marcella.
I was just going to draw attention to the question.
Maybe Denise, I see your hands raised.
Hi, thank you. More of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to put out there, Kip is the best. I started my career with my desk side by side with Kip, so he does an amazing job with presentations and really represented us well on the governor's climate change task force, the GC3. But I do want to put out there that we are having some real challenges. So although we know all the connectivity, there are folks who are still working on the Governor's Council on Climate Change and others who aren't making and connecting all the dots. And I just wanted to reinforce that the work that is happening here, hopefully will reinforce that, because they've actually discontinued the working in natural lands part of the groups that are moving forward with the GC3. Like, the report is out there, like all the work is done, and there's just work that needs to be done. So I just wanted to put it out there that the work that this is doing, I see actually is continuing that GC3 work, and it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you so
I think that's a hugely important reminder, and thank you very much that, even though there is much more conversation between the food world and the climate world, it is not it isn't like, oh, now we're done and everybody's talking to each other. It requires incredible and ongoing attention to make sure that those connections continue to be made. So that's a perfect reminder.
Another reminder, just is about the business sector. There's a business action group on climate change that Heather Burns, I believe, is the CEO of. We should make sure that they're involved as well. It's a group of Connecticut corporations and businesses that are concerned about climate change. And they just had their action summit a couple weeks ago.
Erin, do you have a good contact there? that we
Yes,
can-
I do. I have I know the CEO, Heather Burns, I believe, and they literally just had their big summit, their business action summit for climate change in Fairfield County about 2 weeks ago. So that would be a good organization to be connected to, and I'm happy to connect Martha, you to Heather.
That would be great, Karen.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is Denise again. I just forgot one thing. I did put in the chat a survey on soil health. The Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation is trying to get a baseline on who's working on soil health in Connecticut and providing help to farmers, providing help to community gardens. So this is anybody who's doing anything related to soil health education. We're trying to get a survey done. So I just posted that in there, and it's going to be the basis for a soil health plan for Connecticut. So.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denise and Karen. I'm sharing my screen on my end, which means I can't always see when hands come up. So if you feel like you've put your hand up and I missed you, feel free to unmute and jump in when it feels right. So my apologies for missing you earlier. Unless there's any other questions, Sarah, I think if you want to get the network session digest going.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the comments on the climate plan. And so I think it's also a great, Denise, I think you led us into this interesting conversation about networking, which is another goal of CFSA, is to both develop the state food action plan, and also to build kind of the networks within the state. And so the network session was held, I think, a week ago, and we had Curtis Ogden from the Interaction Institute for Social Change speaking. And he is also connected with some other organizations that you're probably familiar with, like Food Solutions New England. I think he also worked with the Vermont Farm to Plate group to kind of build out their network. And so he led a really great interactive session about the importance of networks and what networks are. And so we really started the session just like kind of demystifying what networking actually means. And we talked about kind of the differences between, if you look at this image at the bottom, kind of the hub and spoke model, which is the one on the right-hand side. And so really thinking about how, you know, as an individual, you might be connected to like all of these different folks. And he was talking about just the difference with kind of the other side, the image. It's not a perfect image, but just thinking about how we can kind of close the triangles. And so really building kind of strength within our network. So like you might be connected with someone, but how can you connect them to someone else? And so he was talking about how a lot of this, both like thinking on networks creates these network effects. And so he was saying that it leads to both kind of adaptive and change to new conditions. So when you have some of these networks in place, you're better able to adapt and change to new conditions that happen. I think COVID-19 response back kind of at the very beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, we started to see how a lot of these networks started to play out, and you could see how communities were really able to respond very quickly, get resources out very quickly, and also kind of adapt and change to these new living conditions that we find ourselves in. And then I think also what's a really great image is the one kind of on the right-hand side of the slide, this like big triangle. And he was talking about how we can kind of build these foundations for networks. And so we're starting really at the connectivity level. So starting to build stronger connections and trust. This is where you really start to exchange, you know, what knowledge, what skills, what resources people are bringing to the table. And then you're starting to, right, like develop an understanding of that. And then you can then move into this middle section of alignment. And so you're really starting to align around visions, around goals, around plans, similar to the state food action plan. And then with that alignment, then you can start to lead to like coordinated action. So think about advocacy and really starting to like push forward some of these things. And so really just thinking about networks in a really broad way, but also kind of how we really need to ground ourselves in building relationships and building trust in order to kind of lead to more resilient food action plans. And so he kind of left us with this thought of, you know, once we do start building these networks and really starting at the connectivity and alignment scale, we can start to ask ourselves, you know, what does this mean for community resilience, or what can this do for our food system? So I thought that was kind of just a good place to leave us in terms of thinking about what these network connectivity really can lead to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think this one really leads us into a really great spot to shift to the next part of this session, which is going to be, you know, we have a smaller group tonight, but I think a vibrant group and a group that's got great networks of their own and connections and things to talk about. So what we were going to do for the second part of this session is just have a larger group discussion, and we're going to give you some prompts and hope to sort of all have a chance to talk and connect and maybe share our networks, and then also get some feedback on the food action plan. So Sarah and I sort of had we made what we hope is a nice jumping off icebreaker start question to get things going. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen since we're a small group so we can all see each other. Hi everyone, it's so nice to see all of your faces. So Sarah and I started out with one question. What we wanted to hear first of all was what really resonated with everyone here. If you missed some of the earlier sessions and got your information tonight, or if you attended one of the earlier sessions, we'd love to know what really resonated with you from each of these sessions or from the ones you were able to attend. And I think if anybody, let's kick it off with going around the screen. And I'll start with Denise, if you want to unmute yourself. Since we're a small group, I think we'll do it that way, and then we can start with an open discussion.
Hi. Obviously, I worked on the Governor's Council on Climate Change. I'm with the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation. So all of the work surrounding that really is what resonates with me. And a couple of things that I'm working on has to do with looking at food security, not just from the individual perspective, where we know in cities we have food deserts and food insecurity, but the idea of food security as a state and as a region, particularly from the perspective of climate change. So, for example, when California's on fire and Florida is underwater, and that's the main place we get our fresh vegetables from. Where do we get our fresh vegetables from? How do we make sure that we have adequate food in our region? And, you know, and from an environmental justice perspective, from a food justice, when these supplies are going to have problems other places, the price of food is going to go up. So how do we maintain not just that we have food, but that we have food that is appropriate? So that's what resonates with me, and I'm looking at how do we have that bigger conversation. And when I talked about the GC3 and the climate change, there was a lot of good information. Like I said, Kip and I were both on it, working on soil health and some other aspects. But I do think the one thing I saw missing from all of the discussion was when they talked about food security, there's really nobody looking at this bigger picture of the climate change and making sure we have food in, because they still see our local food as kind of like niche-y, not that it really is probably going to play a role in the future. We haven't gotten there yet to talk about local food that way or regional food that way.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Denise. I'm gonna popcorn over to Karen.
Denise, would you like to hear like a lot of comments, like if there's a response to something that somebody says, how do you prefer to do this?
So I was going to give everyone an opportunity to talk, but if we want to just, we can open it up after everyone has a chance. If there's anyone who wants to sort of jump off of what Denise was saying and expand further, I think that would be a great opportunity to do it.
Okay. Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to respond to something, that Denise said, if that's exactly, but I don't want to screw up the game plan. Okay.
No, that's totally fine. If you want to jump in and share something, I think now's a great chance.
I think, Denise, that what I'm going to suggest is that if you are free next Tuesday, the 16th, between 12 and 1:15, I would recommend that you sign up for the update from the Feeding New England project, because that is and I don't know if Marcella, if you can, do you have a link to that you can throw it in the chat?
Just put the invitation in the chat.
Okay, because that is exactly what you're saying is such a critically important question. And it is the question that is the reason for that project to be, which is what do we need to do to first of all, to create a New England food shed, and that to be more resilient as a region in feeding ourselves. And the perspective on that project is 30 by 30. So can we produce 30% of what we eat in this region by 2030? And it's very much connected to the New England Food Vision, the Food Solutions New England work, which was originally 50 by 60, this work is underway. It is by no means easy, but one of the things, the kind of like the fundamental principle of the project is figuring out what does the region need to do, and therefore what do each of the 6 states in the region need to do to help achieve that goal. And it is cool work, hard work, satisfying, aspirational, all those things, but it is kind of like it's necessary in order to have that conversation that is not just what we're doing in Connecticut, just what they're doing in Rhode Island, but what are we doing as a region?
Yeah, and just quickly to respond, what we need to get in Connecticut is that there's an urgency to this, and just from the climate change perspective, and it's not just a nice thing that we want to have local food. There's an urgency to it, and people don't see that urgency. I happen to sit on a couple of national boards, and I know what's happening in the other states and the challenges they're having with food systems.
Yep.
So when, like I said, they're not looking at the urgency. And that's what I want to push in Connecticut. And if it comes from a New England group, that's fine, but and I'll let someone else talk now.
I saw Peggy raising her hand.
Yeah.
Peggy, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess my response is sort of thinking that, most people don't think about Connecticut as a great source of our food, which is a problem. And that's something that needs to change. I mean, they think that, all of our food comes from California or the South, or we can't grow food here for, that long. Our season isn't that long. So I think it's a whole mindset that has to kind of change to make it feel, which it is really important to have, to look at these things. And then I was thinking, I had read something about the Department of Ag having some grants available or some new programs to focus on this kind of thing for Connecticut farmers. And so I thought I don't know if Serena has, I don't know. I was just wondering where the Department of Ag fits into all of this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Becky. So in terms of funding, it's not new funding, but for farmers, there's the farm transition grant. And then for municipalities and nonprofits, there's the viability grant. And both of those work by having like categories or topics of focus. Last year, climate was included in both, and the guidance hasn't been released for the new rounds, but I anticipate that it will they will also include a section trying to encourage people to have projects specifically related to climate.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Peggy. Does anybody want to build on that?
I think the question that I had that was more of a question provoked by the session with Massachusetts and Maine was understanding sort of where we stand in Connecticut in terms of champions in the state legislature and other state governmental champions. Because what was interesting was, you know, Massachusetts, the presenter said that they had strong state support and local support. And Maine said they actually had very little in the beginning of state. The state was sort of neutral, not sabotaging, but not supportive was the takeaway. And so I was wondering, for myself, being a little bit of a newcomer, you know, what you know, is the receptivity of key state leaders to a food action plan for Connecticut? Who are the champions? What does the landscape, you know, look like? The political analysis, if you will. Who are the legislators that are really supportive, that need to have, you know, be continued to be developed and nurtured in their support? And then who are some promising new legislators that might be supportive? Just, it made me really think that that was something that Connecticut needed to do. And I didn't know, I assumed that that was something that CFSA probably already knows, but it's not something that I think philanthropy, for example, foundations in Connecticut understand.
Thank you so much, Karen, for bringing that up, because that's actually something that came up. And I think we noted, all of us who were facilitating breakouts in the food action plan session noted on our jam boards was, who are our champions at the state level, and who can we really rely on, partner with, and cultivate relationships with, both new legislators, upcoming legislators, and really strong long-term legislators who can help us sort of bridge the gap between legislative approval, implementation, and also just community support, right? These are trusted people in the community, right. And you know, partnering with them and building those relationships. So that is certainly something that's come up quite a bit, and I'm really glad to hear it sort of continue to be emphasized, because that for us is a good indication that it's something we really need to focus on for the plan.
And I think that there are, I mean, you know, I'll let Serena talk about kind of like how supportive the Department of Ag is on this, but I think that the commissioner has been interested in this. The Connecticut Food Policy Council has endorsed planning as, now exactly how that looks and what does that look like is not a kind of like, is not maybe as specific as we would like it to be. But the Connecticut Food System Alliance is asked to give an update on the progress of this at every Connecticut Food Policy Council session. There are legislators who, it was actually not in this past session, but in a session a year ago, a legislator from in the southwest portion of the state, and I cannot even remember her name because this didn't really go anywhere. She actually she pitched a legislation requiring that Connecticut do a state food plan. So yes, we know that there is a strong public health support for kind of like this type of thing. Senator Marilyn Moore has been a member of the team for the network team for Food Solutions New England forever. You know, and there are others. So I think that we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper, but it is not as coherent a strategy as it needs to be. Yeah. And I don't want to put Serena on the spot, but you know, maybe you can give some insight into kind of like how is the department like thinking about the importance of doing a state food plan?
Yeah. Before I get to the department, just kind of one thing that I wanted to mention more on legislators that I think that will be important for people kind of involved in implementation of the plan and getting support is trying to do the like bridge building and kind of education of that, like all of these different topics are connected, because there's absolutely like strong support in agriculture from legislators. There's strong support in public health from legislators, but trying to get people to see the connections, I think, is going to be an important piece of this. So it's not just they're focused on their one kind of issue.
Right. Because in Connecticut, it seems that the governor pays a lot of attention to the Department of Economic and Community Development.
Yeah.
So getting DECD involved.
Yeah, and I mean, and I don't think that it needs to be like, oh, this is like, you know, there's multiple kind of points or ways that you can look at an issue to kind of make it more appealing, I guess, for different stakeholders to want to engage in and emphasize the economic or the social side or, you know, the justice side, but getting everyone to see that it's the same goal. But yeah, and from the department side, so Commissioner Hurwitz is the chair of the Connecticut Food Policy Council, and the council, as Martha said, is supportive of the state food plan, still has not kind of figured out yet exactly what the role that the council will play in. And I think that that's a similar aspect to the Department of Ag too. I don't speak for the department, but I think that like kind of in conversations, like supportive of a plan overall, but it also kind of is like well, what exactly does that look like? What is it going to mean? And kind of how the department fits in. And the department also, like most of what we work on is from state mandate. And so it would kind of also depend on that first point of what we were talking about of having legislator support.
I think actually this little sort of beginning to this conversation that we're having goes back to what Sarah was talking about in her network digest about if you remember the little diagram on the left, like closing the triangles and making those connections. And I think this is just a really great example of that. I just wanted to throw that in there. Is there anyone else who wanted to kind of expand or offer another perspective on something that really resonated with them during the sessions? You can.
Well, actually, if I can make a comment on the conversation about support. So I'm here with two hats on. I work part-time for the Mass Food System Collaborative, and maybe Winton covered this, I'm not sure. But I also work part-time for the CARE Project. And I'm here today. I tended to be here today more with the CARE Project hat on, but I'm going to jump into the collaborative perspective. In Massachusetts, we had good gubernatorial support, so I'll call it administration support, for the creation of the food plan. With the change of administration, there's not as much support as is needed to actually organize and implement, because a lot of the work around the planning in Massachusetts now, the climate change planning that's going on, is done by administration departments and employees, and without the leadership, i.e. the governor or the governor's office, being really committed, we struggle to actually get a lot of boots on the ground, definitive work done. There's all sorts of planning and networking and that type of conversation. That's important, and it certainly helps move the needle. But at the end of the day, I will add my opinion to your conversation that I think you really need to work probably politically to make sure whoever is sitting in the corner office up there has got a mandate from the constituency that they're going to pay attention to food and agriculture. And it's not just about economic development, because there's a lot of other industries that have a lot more total economic clout, right? But food security, food safety, you know, all the extensions of the economic side of food, you know, somehow has to be articulated well and clearly, and you know, that imperative put into the corner office, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I want to make sure I kind of captured that on the Jamboard accurately. So I guess for my own notes that all of us are going to look back on when we're trying to work through this food plan, I think what you were getting across was that in addition to, building support, we have to plan for building continuity through changes in administration and sort of building the support at the constituent level to make sure that no matter who's in charge, there's going to be people advocating for this in the long term. Does that seem like a fair summation for a Jamboard?
Yeah, I think that's a great synopsis.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anybody
I
else?
also think that I would love to build off that, Jeff, a little bit, because it is one of the things that we have thought about the planning is that it is even though it's a little bit of a messier process and not necessarily as clear cut as if you have a legislature commissioning a plan, that's pretty clear cut. This idea of a hybrid, kind of like grassroots and multiple comers working with government, seems to be kind of like maybe a way to kind of like build a more resilient process. And it's messy and it may or may not be successful, but it is kind of like, it just keeps more people at the table, and it doesn't just rely on you having supportive government to get this done. So I just think that was a critical point that you made. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet that wanted to either jump in to sort of build on what we've been saying or share a new thought about what kind of resonated with these summit sessions? I think we'll stay on this for another couple minutes and then we'll go on to the next sort of round of questioning. Larice, thank you so much. It's all yours.
No problem. I've heard a bunch of great ideas, and it also reminded me of some of the things that I heard in session. I was very happy I don't remember his name, the man from Massachusetts who spoke at the last session. He did talk a little bit about food recovery and food rescue and not wasting so much of our resources and making sure we do something with that. I agree with Martha that I think that it would be really interesting to have a hybrid model. So it's not just something that's mandated from the state level, but something that a bunch of people have hands, really boots on the ground, to help make sure that there's more interest at the table to make sure that everyone gets recognized, everyone's represented. There's more ideas. I think when we leave things to just the state level, there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, and not a lot of things go through that are practical, like day-to-day practical. I think that you need more people at the table to say, this is what I feel, this is how I see it, and we're willing to do that, and not just in a 9-to-5 non-holiday situation, but we're willing to do the work when the work is needed. Also, I liked what Denise shared about looking at the food system and making sure that we think about food security on a state and regional level. As a person who's well-traveled, when I go to grocery stores in other parts of the country, their grocery stores look a lot different than ours. In Connecticut, we're very spoiled. And I know that because when my kids leave here to go to college, they're like, some of that stuff you get at the grocery store, Mom, we don't even ever see when we're in other states. And in Connecticut, we're very, very spoiled. Anything I think of, I can find at one of the grocery stores in the area or nearby, because we ship so much of it. But the problem with that is, with climate change, are we going to be able to sustain that? We need to start really, really investing in our local farms, our local farmers, and make sure that we have a food system that can sustain us with all this climate change. It's not going to cost us a small fortune to keep doing that.
Thank you so much, Larice. Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm capturing these great comments. Unless anybody wanted to sort of jump in on this question, I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump into what Sarah and I had allocated as the next round of sort of prompts.
One question, one thing I just wanted to add was the networking session with Curtis. It was very interesting, and it made me think, or want to ask the question, has the Connecticut Food System Alliance done a analysis of who's in the inner circle, who's in the outer circle, and who in the outer circle needs to be brought in to be more engaged? We did that exercise with the worksheet, and it was really interesting to kind of use it as a real example with a network you're working with, and wondered if, the Connecticut Food System Alliance had thought about who's in the outside circle of your network that you want to bring in closer?
That's a great question. And we have Connecticut Food System Alliance has been around for kind of like several years now, and kind of like has now gone through several iterations. And this is, you know, now getting deep into planning. And in our earlier iterations, we actually had Curtis as in access to his network brilliance to help us think through some of that. And we went through some really incredible exercises about what our network consisted of. But it has not been refreshed, and certainly not done in that kind of like the contiguous circles kind of thing, which I think it would be just a really, really important thing. And for those who are on this call who are members of the steering committee, we should remember that. And this should be something that we do.
Totally my plan.
As a group. Yeah.
Great.
I wrote that down word for word on the Jamboard, so it will make it back to our notes for planning at the next meeting. Thank you so much, Karen. So just really quick, I'm gonna sort of read off our next discussion prompt, and then we can continue this discussion sort of as we've been having it. We'll just pop off of each other and continue the conversation. So what are some creative ways that you feel we can really ensure that all voices are being heard, and how would you want your voice to be included? How can we assure that there's accountability to the people we're asking to contribute or promote or support this work? So accountability for ourselves, and also as people working on this plan, and also accountability for the plan, right? So how can we make sure that this plan continues and is implemented, and the people that are giving of their time and their thought and their energy towards its development are seeing the results on their end. I hope that wasn't too much of a mouthful. If anyone needs me to read it again later, let me know, but I'll open it up if anyone wants to jump in.
Something that I think fits well here was something that my breakout group talked about a lot in the food plan session, was that Tanya and Winton talked a lot about getting input from other people and getting work done by almost like contracted individuals. And I think something that we took away from that was how important it is to seek out this information, but also compensate people for their time and their energy, and to build trust there and cultivate really not so much like workplace relationships, but more so like your input is really important, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure that your voice is heard, you are represented, and the plan works for you as it will work for everybody here. And I think it really something that just really I kept thinking about was like, yeah, we need to pay people for their input maybe, and we need to make sure that we're part of the plan includes paying people the real value of their work, paying the real value of food that's grown here. So I think a lot of it was just like, wait, we need to pay people.
I think that's a growing trend across projects like this, and it's really important and really incredible to see that it's taking hold. I'm glad we brought that up again.
And it was also, sorry.
No, go for it.
It's difficult to get some people to the table. It's difficult to ask a farmer to stop working in the middle of the day to join a 2-hour session that's at 10 a.m. And I think offering something like a financial incentive or being able to meet people where they are is really valuable as well.
Sometimes it's not just emotionally meeting them where they are, but physically meeting them where they are. We can meet you at the farm.
Right.
Does anyone want to kind of respond to that or share another thought?
I will.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi. No, I just want to say that what Marcella said, I think is critical, and it's valuing people's time and input and whatever. And I think that we need a plan to have that happen, to get the plan started in a sense. I mean, one of the things I think about is how to bring people to the table that we don't typically see at the table, And we don't really have a good plan for that, to hear those voices. And so I think that that could be, the beginning, like how to start the plan. Well, we've sort of started the plan, but I think that really needs to be focused on. I think there's a major issue on how to get input from all different parts of the people who should be involved in the food plan and have a say in it. So that would be like a first step.
Yeah.
And we have a project that we have from Connecticut Food System Alliance is hoping for a yes answer on funding that would be kind of like a creative way to get a couple of those voices heard. We've proposed a process that the intergenerational storytelling between youth and older adults related to their experience of the food system and how it works for them, how it doesn't work for them, what needs to change. And these are two sets of voices among many. Peggy, it's, you make a great point. There are lots and lots of voices that need to be heard, but these are two sets of voices that very often aren't represented at policy tables and at kind of like at where like planning for the future is done. So I'm excited about this. We were excited enough about the project that even if our requested funding doesn't come through, we're going to try to figure out a way to get it done. But it is I think that those are the kind of thing, and it's got, and we think that narrative storytelling is a huge component of what needs to be considered for the plan, because that's where the voice of the ultimate plan recipient, which are the folks who live here, and that's where it's heard.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peggy and Martha. And I just do want to share something that Katie put in the chat. The importance of the inclusion of translators or interpreters to make sure that we really are hearing every voice and giving everyone an opportunity to share and sort of removing the barriers that are often in the way from those people being at the table. I think that's really important. And Becca, I'm not going to read out your whole comment because it was a little long, but I do appreciate what you shared in the chat here about educational materials and marketing materials and making sure that those are really accessible, be it providing them in multiple languages or potentially having it as like a digital option that can be read through like an audio function if we have like a recording of it or something like that. I think those are really important things to consider as we're working through all of this. So thank you so much for those comments. Those were really important. Does anybody else want to jump in real quick on this? Maybe anybody who hasn't shared yet?
I think also something that comes to mind thinking about networking is really relying on community partners or community organizations to do a lot of the outreach or hold a lot of these meetings. So like I'm thinking, Larice, I see that you're from Havens Harvest, and right, like Larice would know better the constituency of Havens Harvest than like I would, for example. And so like having Larice hold a community meeting with folks that are engaged in the Havens Harvest to be like, hey, this is something that's happening. And I think that can also go along with some of these comments too around like translators and really thinking about like marketing and how things are accessible is like, right, like if you're having folks who are within community being the ones that lead these conversations, like a lot of those things are just like already in place and they have the infrastructure for it. And then how can CFSA or right, like the Food Policy Council, like start to implement or bring some of these folks together into a larger conversation. So I think really just like grounding within our community partners and really relying on some of those like key networks to start to have some of those conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we really do have such great community partners who do incredible work. I think it's a great way to bring them in and to bring their networks in and lean on our friends who are trusted resources in the community.
Right. I think CFSA can be like the clearing, what a gathering and clearing house for all of these things, and then synthesizing, analyzing, whatever. I mean, first of all, encouraging these conversations to happen at a local level with just like you were saying, what Sarah was saying, having, local conversations, because that's actually where people feel the most comfortable anyway. And they can, that's a very important thing, is to be comfortable. And then CFSA is like, they put it all together, go through it, whatever, and that becomes part of the plan.
Mhm. Monica, I saw you unmute quickly before. Were you jumping in?
I was just going to say, I was thinking similar to what Sarah had said. And I think it's for somebody coming from the community. So in Middletown, what can I do in Middletown to leverage my network to find out what's happening locally and what's important to the people here, so that, as Peggy said, we can bring it back to the larger clearinghouse, because the work really does happen locally, right? Like with whomever the constituent is.
So maybe on our part, making sure that we, when we're going out to each community, having information about, how this plan is really going to be implemented or impact, or what's going on in those communities that will be part of the plan, and having those talking points prepared. That could be helpful.
We have a playbook. We can put together a playbook.
The town by town playbook.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a skeleton structure of kind of what we're looking for to put in the plan. And then it can, people can take it from there and then feed it back to us and or whoever, and have it happen like that.
I also think it's important for the plan to think about regions in the state. That, to Monica's point, the work happens on the town level, and then there's some efforts to have regions, in the absence of county government in Connecticut, more connected. We're trying to do that in Fairfield County, which is really hard. But then, it'd be interesting to see how the new food action plan can think about the state with its distinctive regions, and then the activity and innovations that are happening in a lot of towns within regions. Because I still, think that one of the big problems is that even within a region, like a county, like Fairfield County, there's a lot of work that's happening that's highly disconnected to each other, therefore subscale, not leveraging efficiencies or other bigger funding opportunities. And it makes me just think the Connecticut food plan might be interesting to have a region by region sector, which doesn't then ignore the important towns and cities within those regions.
Yeah, that's actually, Serena, we were on a lot of these COVID statewide food planning calls.
Right.
And it was a similar structure for addressing issues, bringing information up from the town level. It went up to a regional level. Then perhaps the region could address it. If the region wasn't able to, it went up further to the larger sort of all the regions coordinating. I think that's an interesting framework to sort of think about how we're disseminating and collecting information. Thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't.
Right. And I think also COVID probably shed light on the ways that working at the regional level can be both positive and also frustrating, there's been some unprecedented learning about working regionally just in the last year with COVID. How does that inform thinking regionally for the Connecticut Food System Alliance and the Food Action Plan?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen. You just connected so many dots in my head. I appreciate that.
But I think there's some more, I would imagine there's more receptivity and more muscle around it because of what everyone went through during COVID, where we were forced to think regionally when never before we ever did, really. So just wondering about that. Yeah.
Denise, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so as we've been talking, I was thinking of where we need to go. And, right now, everybody is talking about infrastructure. And of course, the different definitions of infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, green infrastructure. We've been talking about soils as part of our green infrastructure, healthy soils as part of our green infrastructure. But as I'm looking at this, I'm looking at an agricultural plan. That is the infrastructure. We need a food system and we need it in place. So I think tapping into that discussion on infrastructure is a creative way, getting funding from an infrastructure perspective, just like they're talking about daycare as infrastructure for the workforce. We need to talk about a food system and how do we get the infrastructure in place. Some of it will be hard. We need production facilities. We need a whole host of things that support agriculture. But the system itself is the infrastructure, just like the transportation plan is part of the infrastructure. So I think we need to start talking about it like that in terms of getting dollars. So just putting that out there as we're talking.
That's fantastic, Denise. Thank you. I'm thinking back to some earlier meetings we had about the food action plan in our working group, and we were talking about what lens are we looking at the plan through, what lens are we looking at the communications through, and I think we had several words that we had up on a list, and I think maybe adding infrastructure to that list of what lens are we looking at things through is going to be an awesome opportunity for us. Is there anyone else who wanted to sort of jump in or add right now?
I just have one last quick
Okay, yeah.
thing. So this morning at the Connecticut Public Health Association conference, they were talking about vaccine equity and everything that we learned. Connecticut has really good vaccine equity. And one of the keys was working through trusted messengers. So it goes back to that, the conversation we were having earlier about working through our local networks, both to get information out about the plan, but also to find out what should be in the plan. So just wanted to bring that back. I don't know if anybody else was at CPHA today, but there was a couple of great conversations around that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monica. So just keeping an eye on the time, unless anybody else wanted to jump in, I'm gonna take us to the next question that we're hoping is going to sort of tie all of these really wonderful contributions together. And we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but we would love to know, what do you see as the next steps, the next actions that we at the Food System Alliance, as a working group working on this food action plan, like what should we be taking? What's the next step you want to see us do? Is it really building on sort of this networking piece of it? What do you want to see us do next? And it doesn't have to just be about the food action plan. If you want to see us plan, offer different types of resources or things like that, we want to hear everything. So please share away. There's nothing we're not looking to hear from you. Oh no, Marcella.
I mean, I'm part of the Connecticut Food System Alliance, so I might be just giving myself some work right here. But things that Sarah mentioned specifically really resonated with me about engaging with these community partners that we do have and that are part of our network more frequently. I know we do a lot of work with farmers markets, and that's really important. Those are really valuable resources for us. But engaging other people who could be part of our alliance in a coalition capacity, maybe on a stronger level, somewhere between being on the steering committee and just receiving all of my emails, engaging them in having some conversations and leading some discussions and tapping into their network. I think that could do a lot in terms of removing some barriers to this work, the information, access to the food system itself. So I think I'll be doing a lot of thinking about how I can engage the incredible resources that we have further.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcella. And for anyone who doesn't know, Marcella did an incredible amount of work sort of pulling all of this together, and she did a really great job. So thank you so much for everything you've done to kind of make this summit happen. You are very good at what you do.
Thank you, everyone. So even though it's a Tuesday, it is a good week. So
I do, again, I want to kind of like build a little bit on what Marcella is saying, is that, having worked in this, both at Hartford Food System and been involved in Connecticut Food System Alliance for as long as I have, there's a thing that I wish wasn't true, which is the whole idea and the whole realm of policy it doesn't generally get people, they just don't get jazzed about it, unless of course you're a policy nerd, in which case you do. And But it's like how, I think that a next step for us, and I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but a little bit of what Marcello was saying, I think is part of it, is how do you get people excited about what the value of thinking comprehensively about the food system means? And I think it's a tall order, because I mean, people think about how they get groceries on the table at the end of the day, and they think about whether they're going to be able to, get a meal fixed for their kids, and they're going to be thinking about whether school meals are going to happen, kind of like, they're thinking about their day-to-day life, as they should. So how do you draw the connection between day-to-day life and everybody's daily participation in the food system into feeling like it might be important that we think about this comprehensively and planfully? And what does it take to do that? And I just think that we can't ever forget that for most people, they are just not thinking about plans, and they are not thinking about kind of like state legislation, and they are not thinking about the things that we think about when we do planning. But that doesn't mean we don't have to try to make it important and help people see the connection between their day-to-day life and how this might make things better for them. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's
one of the things I think could be a next step. It feeds a little bit on, Martha, what you just said, is sort of like a fact sheet on some of the urgent data in Connecticut, because I was trying to find it to pull together for a donor, and it was kind of all over the place. So, the loss of Connecticut farms, how, we've had a huge loss of working farms, the increase in the cost of food in Connecticut, all the data behind the 30 by 30. There seems like there's some really good facts that are statewide facts about the food system that would be great to kind of have in a very powerful one pager that can then be used when talking to legislators, private funders, other stakeholders. Because I was kind of collecting it myself to try to put it all on one page. And I think that there's some scary and powerful facts about where we as a state fit relative to other states. And I think where we fit relative to other states gets people's attention, particularly at the governor's level and the state agency level. They all want to know, how does Connecticut compare to its New England states and other states that it sees itself as comparable to. Colorado, as an example. And it just having that all on one page would be really helpful.
Yeah. And Marcella just made a really great comment in the chat, and that policy language and data can oftentimes be really unapproachable for a lot of people. And I think, like what Martha was saying, people have a lot going on. And we're really in a position of privilege, right? That we can have these conversations, and a lot of people don't have access, be it time or the resources to engage with this process as much as they might like. So I think it's our responsibility, right, to make sure we're making it as accessible as possible, as easy to understand as possible, and removing a lot of those barriers and making sure that whoever wants to be involved can be involved. And even if they don't have the time to be quote unquote involved, that we're giving them the resources to feel like they at least know what's going on. And I think that is like a Food System Alliance, that's one of our undertakings, and that's sort of, again, like a lens that we should and can be looking at this plan through, and not just the plan, but how the plan's implemented and how it's communicated from the whole process from start to finish, top to bottom. So that's, I'm gonna let it go back to the group, because I really want to hear what everyone else has to say. Peggy, I saw you just unmuted yourself.
Right. Well, I think what Karen just said would be fantastic to have a one page, if we could do that and simplify things and then put it in other languages, whatever. But I think that could be the basis for community conversations. And I think that we should and would be good to focus on finding groups in different places that would carry on the conversations locally, regionally, whatever, to just get some input, get some people on board. I think that just spreading it out like that would be wonderful to bring it, out there. And I somehow was thinking that this whole issue with supply chain at the moment actually is a wonderful thing to use to show people. I mean, there's things out there about you better get your turkey fast because, and I think that people are like, their antennas are up. Like, this is a good time to talk about the fact that this is part of that problem, that we don't have local, this feeds into that issue, but people now are paying attention. And they're not just for toilet paper, but for, for turkeys and for whatever else they want to buy, cars. It's a whole issue out there that is the food system is part of that problem. So anyway, I think people are more attuned to the issue, the problems.
Yeah. We may even need to put some effort into explaining what supply chain means. For even breaking it down to that level, I think, and helping people see what that looks like.
Right.
Really
Well, you can just say you can't get what you want. That's easy. There's a broken supply chain. You can't.
Right. The broken supply chain impacted public school lunch programs.
Oh, yeah, right.
And this fall, there was a major chaos.
Yes. Right.
In public schools in affluent suburban communities and urban communities. It was across the board.
Yeah. It's been really terrible. Not that everybody should have all of those things that they really wouldn't, but anyway, it could be part of the conversation. People get it a little more because of what's happening, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a point on that. Karen bringing up the public schools still are having enormous supply chain challenges, and USDA, the Connecticut Department of Education, Department of Ag, and all of our kind of outreach and communications. I work on farm to school programs. We're doing a lot of we can help connect you with producers who, you don't have to be going through this whole distribution chain, and kind of working through distributions. And while it's incredibly unfortunate that it's happening, it is also, as Peggy was saying, an opportunity because people kind of, then can see it as
real.
Yeah.
Real.
Thank you so much. This is such a great sort of ending question. I'm so glad we ended here. Ended on this question. We're not done yet. We've got a few more minutes to chat. Did anyone else, maybe anyone who hasn't jumped in yet, want to share? Denise, I see maybe a hand going up. Yeah. And then Larice, we'll go to you right after.
So I think Martha talked about policy. I am a policy wonk. So it's what I do. And one of the things I think would be really important is to look at, obviously state policy. What do we have? What don't we have? Where do we need to go? And obviously we're not going to have all of that until we have a plan, but at least we know what's missing here. Is there something that we need to be thinking about right away? But more importantly, or just as important, I should say, is, as you know, Connecticut's not a state that has a lot of resources. We're always behind the 8 ball when it comes to funding, but the federal government isn't. And making sure that we get our share of what is coming or should be coming to us. And Connecticut hasn't been good about getting federal resources. Is it true across the board with the environmental community, and food systems are not any different? Obviously, there's certain things we do get just because it's delegated by demographics and whatever, but there's certain policies that we don't. So if you don't know, we have a 2018 Farm Bill. Farm Bill's coming up in 5 years. So 2023, we'll have a new Farm Bill. And what policies do we need? And I'm just going to give you an example. I work on the conservation title. I know a lot of people work on this on the food security SNAP title. Other people work on the commodity title. I work on the conservation title, which is the soil health folks, and where Kip used to work with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. That particular section of the legislation, for years and years and years, all the money went to the Midwest. And what we were able to do was change it that said they had to have regional equity with distribution of funds. And so we put that simple thing in place, and we have a much more robust amount of money coming in to support USDA staff here, as well as our farmers and payments to farmers to do things like soil health on the farms. So just, so, and some of the urban ag grants you're seeing, a lot of those are coming out of that whole policy of urban, or I should say, of having regional equity. So just want you to put that lens on that this is coming. And so when we're talking about next steps, one of the things, whether it be regional through this New England group people we're talking about, but as a state legislature, I mean, as a state organization, we should be thinking about Farm Bill. And I have to say, Connecticut doesn't weigh in on federal legislation from a Farm Bill perspective the way they should. And we really need to. And I'll just give you one more quick example, and then I'll let folks chime in and get onto other things. But the Long Island Sound study, which has nothing, well, it has to do with shellfishing, so it is about aquaculture, but there's a coalition that started lobbying in Washington, and they took the funding from Long Island Sound from $4 million a year, which it was for about 20 years. And this year they're going to be getting $40 million. It went from 4 million, which it had been for about 20 years, 5 years ago. It went up to 8, it went up to 12, it went up to 4. Now they're going to be getting $40 million this year for the Long Island Sound program. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of money, and the best funded agency is, well, besides the Department of Defense, but the best funded agency in what we do is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They have the largest conservation program in the United States. So it's not U.S. Fish and Wildlife, it's not EPA, it's USDA. And we need to pay attention and get those dollars coming into our state. But one of the things we need to do is make sure the programs say that we can use it the way we want to use it. So for example, if the city of New Haven wants to put in a community garden, they can get some USDA funding, but if they don't get some of those big grants programs, we can't use USDA money on city land for community gardens easily, because other folks lobbied that not to put things on public lands, because out west, as you know, there's a lot of public lands. We're trying to change that to say not that we can use Farm Bill money on non-federal lands, so that we can use it on municipal lands, so that we don't take municipalities out of that public land. So there's tweaks like that we need to make. And so I think we should just have that conversation. So.
Thank you so much, Denise. Larice, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say that Martha brought up a really good point, that we need to impress how important this is to just regular people and have them weigh in their thoughts. Because when you're a mom with little kids and they're running around and you're busy just making sure people keep going, and you're worried about, how you're going to pay your bills and how you're going to keep the kids doing their homework and this and that, you don't have time to run around about state policy, state plans, and climate change. It's just not on their radar. And I think that we need to get more information out to people. Why is this important? Why are we working on a state plan? What is this going to mean for your kids in 20 years? What's it going to mean for your grandkids in 40 years? People don't understand why it's important because they don't have time to even think about it, because they have so many other things on their plate. It's just not really in front of them. So if we can get campaigns, the one pages are great for when we're speaking to corporations and to politicians, but just quick excerpts of information on maybe social media about, hey, this is important. Hey, we need to hear your voice. What do you think about this? Tell me your stories, just so that regular people get to put input into something that's going to affect them for the long term.
Yeah.
And Denise, I love that you do policy. If you could help me with working on some policy about what we do with recovered food and maybe make some policies for the state of Connecticut to not throw away so much food, I'd be glad to talk to you on that.
Happy to do that.
Oh my
And I just
gosh.
want, and just quickly on what you just said, Operation Fuel is an unbelievable outreach mechanism. So they're working on energy and utilities and helping people pay their utility bills, but they've now just expanded that to work on water utilities. So with water utilities and also water conservation. So they've moved it from energy to water, and they may be someone who would be a great net outreach for us because they already have all these connections. So when you think about food as a utility, we all need energy, we all need water, and we all need food. So I'm putting that out there as a potential networking opportunity for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larisse. Brandon, I see you've got your hand up if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if this was mentioned yet, but I think along with the food action plan, something important maybe to think about an actual integrated marketing strategy around these concepts, so that it's more so a very focused approach to disseminating information that is really important, but using the tools that that are out there, to get this information out there in a way that's consumable, and I may be working with some local marketing agencies that have some CSR that they want to do to actually get the messaging out there, or to work on a strategy to do so that is just pulling levers to be able to disseminate information quickly and effectively. Because I think a lot of times if you don't exist within the food system, the concepts are either very ethereal and sort of hard to obtain, if you're not used to the terminology, or just hard to understand, or I think as someone said it, people don't have time to understand everything, but being able to effectively give information through our.
Oh, Brandon, I think you muted yourself again.
Sorry, I got there. So just lastly, giving people a little bite of something that tastes good, and then inspiring them to go out and do their own research, on top of that, and being able to, help them in that research as well. So that's just something I was thinking about as we were talking.
I like that, a bite of something that tastes good. That feels like a weekly social media education series that we could be doing.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you. So Marcella's going to work that into our materials going forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. If there's anyone that should take it, I think it's her. So absolutely, take it and run.
Awesome. So in the interest of time, did anyone have anything else they wanted to sort of like jump in and share, or build on what someone else might have shared? All right.
It's just a comment in the chat that dumpster diving is illegal in Connecticut, and I wonder how much food is going to waste because it didn't look good enough for the shelves. I think the answer is a lot, right?
Well, that is certainly something that I think we can kind of work into. Yes, Food Rescue USA started right here in Connecticut. This is awesome. See, we're learning so much tonight, everyone. Oh, Martha.
There's a question from Denise on, do we
Yeah.
need legislation requiring development of a food action plan? I think that one of the other benefits of working with the other 5 New England states is that their other 5 plans were all developed in different ways and hybrids. One of them, Massachusetts, did say, do a plan. Maine was, the state said, don't do a plan, or we're not going to help you with that. And it's kind of like in New Hampshire, it was not state legislated. So it is a way, it is an approach, certainly clarifies things. If you do have the state kind of like commissioning a plan, but it isn't essential to having a plan that be the only route.
Yeah, and Jeff, you might know more specifically, but I don't even think in Massachusetts it was through legislation, right? It was just through the Massachusetts, the Food Policy Council.
Yeah, technically it was through legislation. The policy
Oh, okay.
council
Gotcha.
was established through legislation, and then there
Okay,
was
okay, so
funding put in a pool to pay for creating a plan through legislation.
Awesome. So I'm just going to give everybody one more opportunity if anybody wanted to jump in real quick. I think we've had a really incredible discussion tonight, and I hope everybody else feels like they got something good out of these conversations. I think, I don't like to speak for other people, but I'm going to speak for the other CFSA people on here, that I feel like we got a lot of really great stuff out of this.
Thumbs up, yeah.
So thank you so much for giving of your time and your energy and your thoughts to this. It's very impactful and very helpful. And in the spirit of networking and sharing this message and building on what we talked about tonight, I hope that a lot of you will take maybe something you heard here and share it with someone in your network or your community to kind of start maybe closing some of those triangles that we talked about and bringing more people in. And I'm going to just share my screen one last time real quick. If I don't even have the presentation open, but Marcella can maybe send out later on. We had a final list, a final slide that had everybody's information on it. But again, thank you all so much, so much for being here tonight on a Tuesday. I know it was beautiful out today, so maybe some of you had plans, but we appreciate you all being here tonight. So thank you again. And Martha or anybody else from CFSA, if there's anything anybody wanted to say before we sort of wrap up.
This was a relatively small group, but man, what a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. I wrote down many things, and I know that I can't see the Jam board, but I know that it's full of amazing feedback. So we really do appreciate it.
I'm gonna say, I think this was a great conversation, and the 4 sessions have been fabulous. Adds a lot to our agenda, and there's a lot of work to be done, but there are a lot of good people to do that work, so that's very comforting.
Yes, and I want to thank Jenny and Sarah for planning this session specifically. I know I learned a lot, and I really appreciate all of the discussion that you were able to facilitate here. And one last thing, if you're not connected with CFSA on social media, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where I will hopefully be sharing some of these ideas with our network there. And if you're interested in joining our listserv, you can send me an email at communications@ctfoodsystemalliance.com, and I can get you on there, and you'll have access to updates and reading lists and future events. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I know we're ending a little early. I think we're going to give you 22 minutes back in your evening. So thank you so much. And yeah, I hope we see you all again soon at some future events. So please stay in touch.
All right. Happy holidays, everyone.
Oh, yes.
Happy Thanksgiving coming up. I can't believe it already. All right. Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
Have a great night.
Bye. Bye, everyone.